So I left you in the previous video at this particular state. We have all of these animations set up, and we also have the animation names. If you are kind of annoyed by this, you can just, if you just want to check the name of the animation, so all you can do is simply click on this and that will go away. And of course, if you hate these grid lines as well, you can make them go away by clicking on this. So animations are all set, and we also previewed it. It all works fine. Now the next step for us is going back to the animation blueprint. Remember, this is the blend space, and if you look here, you can find the animation blend space, and this is the new blend space. I don't know where it's coming from. So if I right click and okay, I don't know, if I click on that and if I right click, nope. Okay, so if I click on this, I don't know where that came from, but our blend space is called a walk run blend space. Again, if I right click, and now I can go and browse to asset, but again, I'll just double check that everything is right, and I don't think there's any issues here. So I'll just go and fix up redirectories in the folder, and if I come back to the animation blueprint, I can still see that. I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm not going to bother. If I look around, it says it's inside character blend spaces, and if I, but I'm not able to find anything in there. I think that's just a default one which is not able to load, but that's okay. So now, in order for this thing to work, it's working fine in the blend space, but we have to translate that into the animation blueprint, right? So for that, we have to actually set up these states here. So, and we'll do that inside the walk and run. So when I double click, and this is going to set up the walk and run, now we will start manipulating, we'll start drawing out the values from the walk run blend space, and we will be supplying that to the final animation pose inside the result node here. Okay, so look for your, the walk run blend space, the one that we just created, and drag and drop it here, and that will be coming in as a node. Okay, and once that's done, you have to connect these two so that there's a connection. So whatever values are coming in from here, that will be passed on to this final animation pose. And based on this, so let's say if I give it a direction of, the direction is from -180 to 180. So if I give it a direction of, let's say, 120, and the speed as, let's say, I don't know, 250, and when I hit compile, it's not going to do that. That's because the node is not using any blueprint, so it's not going to work. So I'll go back and I'll replace that to the default, because we haven't really set up the blueprint on event graph yet. So it's not going to do anything until you actually call this, but the connection is made, which is an essential first step. Okay, so first things first. So now that we have this, it doesn't know where the direction and the speed is coming from. So it's got no input whatsoever. And even if you are giving any inputs or direct values out here, it's still not activating that inside the event graph. Okay, and because that needs to happen inside the update animation or a bunch of other nodes, which we'll talk about later. But first things is, we want these things to be coming in as variables, and we cannot really, we cannot really access these pins here without actually having a variable or some sort of connection with the blend space itself. So the best way to do it is to right click and go ahead and promote that to a variable, and name this as, this is a direction, so I'll just call this direction. Simple. And then again, right click and promote this to a variable, and bring this down here. So line them up nice and good. Okay, and rename this to speed. So we have two values, we have two variables, direction and speed. Now when I compile, it's still not gonna do anything because these are still just variables sitting out there. Now which needs to be manipulated, which remains to be manipulated through our event graph inside. Okay, so now that we're in here, we have to do a bunch of things. First thing is, let's add a sequence node so that we can do things in a sequence. And the reason we have a sequence node is so that we can execute a bunch of things one after another and in a neat fashion, right? So, and then in 0, in the first one, so first thing is, we have to cast this to a character. We are casting this to a character and not our third-person character. That's because we won't be using the third-person character later on. Instead we'll be using our own character, which is based on a character. That's why we're casting it to that. Now, also, this has to come in from somewhere, because this does not have a reference. It needs to come in from somewhere, and it needs to know what to cast. to character. So I'm going to pull out a wire from here and I'm going to say try get pawn owner. So this is going to try and get the pawn owner for us, then cast that to a character. Okay, and then after that, from the try get pawn owner, I will first say get rotation. Okay, and that should be I'm setting it up. I'm setting all of these. I'm calling all of these functions so that I can set up the direction and the speed. Okay, so we have a direction. We have a direction fixed. Now let's also fix for our speed. So I will say velocity, and this will be getting the velocity of the particular actor or of the particular pawn. Okay. Okay, so the first thing is, now that we have this, we have calling the functions, it's returning a vector, and this is also returning a vector. No, it's actually returning rotator. So we're going to be using these two, the output from these two functions, to calculate the direction and the speed, which will later on go inside this, and which will go inside the final animation pose. And hence, we actually, essentially what we're doing through code is we are trying to simulate this particular function out here. As I'm moving this marker, and it is actually calculating the speed and the direction, and then it's blending all the animations and it's setting it up. That's exactly what we are trying to do inside the code, because we cannot really count on blend spaces to do it for us. In fact, we have to do it ourselves. So as a character, we can, if once you cast to character, we can actually call in a bunch of functions that are specific to the character. So there's a function called calculate direction. Okay, that's going to calculate the direction. Very handy function. And if you hover your mouse over that node, it says returns degree of the angle between velocity and rotation forward vector. Okay, and of course the range of return will be from -180 to 180, and this can be used to feed blend space direction values. So it's very specific with its utility. It needs a bunch of values. It needs a bunch of input as velocity and a vector and a rotator, and it calculates the direction, and this is going to serve the blend space calculations for us. So quite a handy function. Now the target is going to be self. There's going to be nothing else. The return value will be connected to the velocity because I want to pass that in, and also we want to connect the return value as the base rotation. From the get active rotation, the return value will be connected to the base rotation of calculate direction node.